Hello, everyone. I'm going to give it just a few seconds because I saw a lot of people log on, and then they probably saw the screen and it logged off. But welcome to Think About It Thursdays. I cannot believe that it has been a full month since we had Julian Gold here. And I announced that we would be advertising or that we would be interviewing Lauren Krapf tonight, all around this topic of social media transparency. So if you have found us, Mazel Tov. If you're on Facebook, go ahead and click share at the bottom and tell all your friends to come on. We are going to be talking a ton about this concept of social media transparency. You might have no idea what it's about, but I guarantee at the very least you will know what it is about by the end of tonight. So I'm going to give it just a few more seconds. I don't know. A lot of people logged on and then I'm hoping it didn't stop. So if you are here, give us a little holler so I know that it's working before I invite Lauren on, because I do not want to waste her time. There we go. It's starting to work. Give me a second. And let's see. Lauren, are you ready? Are you ready? Okay. All right. We're there. It looks like. All right. Here we go, Lauren. And without further ado, here is Lauren Krapf. Hello. Hold on one second.
No problem.
All right. If you can hear me, please write in that you can hear me, because people are on, but I just got some feedback that perhaps you can't hear us. So before I do Lauren's official welcome, because it would be a shame if you couldn't hear it, please write into the chat if you can hear us. This is off to a great start. Write in the chat on either Facebook or YouTube if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Lauren?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, that's good.
Robin, I can hear you in the chat.
Sophie, thank you. All right.
Okay, great.
That's all that matters. Okay. It's always a bumpy start with social media, but we're not going to talk about that tonight.
I was going to say apropos, but we'll talk about the other pieces.
Definitely apropos. But the human error that comes along with this is a whole other topic that we probably could spend about 17 hours talking about. But alas, we will not. So first of all, welcome, Lauren. Everybody should know that Lauren's like my little sister, and I just want to say that because I love her very much. And we were blessed to grow up together here at Temple Emanuel, Beverly Hills, in Beverly Hills. And there's just a little bit of me that's so proud of everything that you do and have become. And it's amazing how our worlds are so interconnected, as appropriate, for sure, but we never could have guessed it. So welcome, Lauren. I'm going to give your official bio, because even though I know you very, very well, and many of our congregants do, not everybody knows you. So even though it's going to sound formal, sometimes you might want to cover your ears or your eyes, but I'm going to give it. So Lauren is ADL, which is the Anti-Defamation League's. I'm just going to interrupt really quick. Everybody can hear us. So go.
This is great.
My mother is now on the thing. This is lovely.
No, she's not.
Hold on.
There's no sound.
Sometimes definitely is.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna give it. So Lauren is. I don't know what they owe me for that one. All right. At least say haha so I don't feel so awkward about that. They didn't have sound. Do you know why? Because their sound wasn't on. So that's why. All right. Lauren Krapf, I am going to give you your official formal intro. So Lauren Krapf is the Anti-Defamation League. I don't want to take for granted that a lot of people always say ADL and don't know what that means. So the Anti-Defamation League's Council of Technology Policy and Advocacy. You lead strategy and operations for ADL's initiatives to fight online hate, hold big tech accountable, and protect targets of digital harassment. Prior to joining ADL, Lauren worked as an attorney in Los Angeles, where she managed trial and appellate litigation and advised employers about issues and policies related to workplace harassment prevention. Also, a very, very important issue. I'm going to say this wrong. Lauren was an Ernie Pyle. Did I get it? Yes, an Ernie Pyle Scholar at Indiana University and chief note and comment editor of the International Law Review at Loyola Law School. And on top of everything that you're doing right now, you're currently pursuing a master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania School of Policy and Practice. And this was super, super exciting that you were selected. Oh, this is so exciting. I didn't get this. So you're way cooler than me. Lauren was selected as one of New York's Jewish Week's 36 under 36. That was in 2020. So that was one good thing that happened that year, right? And in 2021, her work at ADL won honorable mention in Fast Company's magazine's World Changing Ideas Awards. So mazel tov on all of that. Although part of me says it's unfortunate that the reason why awards are won and you have this job is because there is still so much hate in this world. That's a hard thing to, right?
Very true. I mean, I talk about job security and I don't take it lightly because, ADL's mission has been to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all since 1913. And we haven't changed that mission. And it's just as relevant today as it was then.
Absolutely. So Lauren and I, I had a little more human error here, but Lauren and I, when we were prepping for today, of course, we had Lauren on a year ago, I want to say, to talk about your work with ADL, but we always do a little bit of trivia, and I'm not going to waste a ton of time on trivia, but I think the trivia that we have chosen for tonight is super important because it gives context to how far our world has come in terms of how we rely on internet today. So, Lauren, do you know what year people really started to have internet access? Were you born?
I was born when people started to have internet access, and I'll tell you that there were no real laws around the internet at all until 1996. So I was definitely born, but I'll tell you, I wasn't doing too much back then.
That's the time when I was using like the typing game to learn how to type, and that was the only thing I knew about the world.
Native speaking, exactly.
Yes, exactly. Those were the good old days. All right. So can you share with everyone? Now we did review this, so I'm not just putting Lauren on the spot. Around how many people were even had access to the internet in 1996?
So in 96, only 40 million people worldwide in the entire world had access to the internet, which is quite different from today.
Right. So I'm pulling up the numbers. And maybe if you are watching, let's give people a little bit of a second so we have some real trivia in here. How many people have access to the internet today? I will give you the hint of there are 7.9 billion people on the planet today. I'm not even talking about other universes. Who knows? So if 7.9 billion people are in the world today and 40 million people used the internet in 1996, let's see some guesses of how many people have access to the internet today. I'm going to give it some like, do no 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 no. Nope. I didn't get any guesses. People are shy. Okay, Lauren, share it with us.
Okay, 4.6 billion people. Oh, we had one guess.
All right.
Which
Trillion.
is there 4.6 billion people, and that's nearly 60% of the global population. So
I mean,
it's a
that
lot
is
of people.
huge.
Yeah,
That's huge. Almost like a trillion.
almost.
Okay. Almost. So here's what's interesting about this. One of, well, I would say the biggest influencer, creator of social media, Mark Zuckerberg. Do you know how old he was in 1996 when 40 million people had access to the internet? How old was Mark Zuckerberg?
Should
One
we
more
wait to
guess.
see? Should we have people guess?
I think let's give it like a little bit of guessing time. Remember, there's a little bit of delay here, about probably 15
Perfect.
seconds. So we have to, that's what I was doing. Let's see, Adrian. Let's see. 21. It's interesting that people have to guess how old he is now. And I would bet that
It's
people,
2021. Okay.
people think that he's older right now, probably because of his success than he is. But
I think
he's
that's
just about my age. All right, Lauren, give us a number.
Mark Zuckerberg was 11 years old in
How
1996 at the dawn of the internet.
crazy is that? The dawning of the internet. So I was sharing with Lauren the other day that when Facebook was created, I was a freshman in college, and the first thing that Facebook was used, it was actually quite awesome. It was used to just, you could see who was in your biology 101 class, and everything was just divided. Lauren doesn't remember because she was in 8th grade or something, but but really that's what it was for first, and it rolled out college by college by college. And I went to UC Irvine. I think we were the 67th college. I don't know why I know that fact. That's trivia. We were the
That's
67th
interesting.
college, maybe 47th, to get Facebook. So I'm very proud of that. I mean, I don't know if I should be proud these days, but
I do remember when I was applying, or when I got into college, we had to use a college email, a .edu, to sign up for Facebook. So,
well,
a
there
little
you
bit
go.
different now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. To sign up for Facebook. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, just to I think when people think of social media, they go immediately to Facebook.
Yeah.
After that, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, for sure. But just as a reminder to everybody, Facebook was founded in 2004. So six, I guess you could say 17 years ago. But to me, that doesn't feel like so long ago,
Yeah.
considering it was, yeah,
And
majorly.
TikTok was founded in 2016.
Wow, that is incredible. Do you know what year YouTube was founded? This is almost as incredible.
Should we have people guess?
No, because we're going to get to the good stuff in a second. YouTube was founded in 2005. Twitter was founded in 2006. And then 10 years until, as Lauren said, 2016. Yes, Adrian, remember MySpace? I was definitely on MySpace before Facebook. That was a good one. All right, so that's our trivia. Lauren, let's see. Did I miss anything interesting there?
I think you got it.
I think I got it.
Officially warmed up to the internet and how different it is now versus then.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we're really getting into today is there has been so much news revolving around what responsibility social media platforms have um, for their behavior, but actually not just their behavior, for humanity's behavior in the world. So that's where we're going to kind of lead up to. But for right now, let's just start with what what were the laws related to the internet that actually were even passed in 1996?
Sure. So laws, you use the plural, but it's really one singular law that was passed and remained in 1996. It's called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And I promise we're not going to get into too much legal jargon, but
I like a
essentially,
little bit.
yeah, what Section 230 does is it provides immunity from liability for pretty much any interactive computer service. So any platform, any website for user generated content. So let's say internet companies can be responsible for content that they generate, but have no responsibility whatsoever if a third party generates that content. Now that's regardless of whether it's an advertisement, regardless of how the company may have seen this content proliferate, anything. So this really strong immunity from liability was passed in 1996, and for good reason, because they wanted internet companies to feel comfortable innovating and providing access to people so we could chat and share information and all the rest. And these were really small, budding companies. But the law has, with a few very, very narrow exceptions, the law has essentially remained the same since 1996. But as we've just talked about for the last, 10 minutes or so, the internet looks very different now. And the way in which the internet influences our lives is incredibly different. And the power and resources that many platforms or interactive computer services have are so much greater than they were then. So this immunity from liability is really being questioned across the board, whether it should be reformed, completely struck down, upheld. And ADL strongly believes that the internet looks very different, and that platforms need to be held accountable in certain instances, and that Section 230 should be reformed in some way that's smart and thoughtful, but really gets at this power that platforms have over how we see information and how it harms individuals.
Yeah, it's amazing when you were talking about that. I for a moment was thinking about the fact that when social media started, as you said, and it was supposed to be used as a social platform for people to get to know each other, to go back and see their high school pictures, things like that. Um, but and now we think of it as like another news source. And then I was imagining that, if the New York Times just let anybody take a post-it note and just slap it on their newspaper and said, meh, we have nothing to do with it. I think that puts it like it's just another way of thinking about spreading news. Like somebody has to be held accountable for being given this platform to share news. So I don't know if anybody else has thought about it that way, but I certainly
There's yeah, there's definitely discussions about, should platforms be held accountable the same way that media companies like the New York Times should be. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be the case. But the thing about these platforms is they're so dynamic. They're not
yeah.
just news sources. They're not just social platforms. They're, ways in which people organize, people educate, people gather, worship even, right? We've seen
Right.
that over the high holidays. So because of the dynamic nature of
Or
social
every
media,
Shabbat.
exactly right, exactly, every Shabbat. I'm just excited we can do more live and in-person things now.
True.
But
Everybody should.
um, but ultimately, it's that dynamic nature that makes us think, well, they're special and unique and different from the New York Times or the LA Times or other publications because we want people to be able to do all of the things I just said. We want
Right.
regular people to do, but we also want to ensure that when platforms know what's going on or when their algorithms fuel incitement to violence or harassment, things that are not protected by the First Amendment, that they too can be held accountable. Otherwise, there's no incentives for them to take care of that situation.
Right. So, as we talked about, ADL was founded in 1913. We could give an entire history of that, but it goes back to Leo Frank in Georgia. Leo Frank, I mean, there's so many reasons why I know Leo Frank's story, partly because he is unfortunately the subject of my favorite musical, Parade by Jason Robert Brown, which literally tells him his story of a Jewish man that was blamed for the murder of a young girl. But ADL was, as you said, formed to help fight hate against the Jewish people, and now to bigotry and hate all across the universe. But how did it evolve? Here your position today is dedicated to internet hate. So can you give us a little bit of information of the evolution of ADL's fight against online hate, as opposed
Absolutely.
to just the phone calls that come in. I want to give one fact just so people understand. And Lauren and I were in the ADL's glass class together. But the fact that we learned that ADL is the number one non-governmental agency that trains police officers, that does anti-bias training. ADL is very woven in to college how do you say it, youth boards is what I was going to say, but ADL is brought in all the time. So how tell us a little bit about the evolution to fight online hate.
Absolutely. And, like you mentioned, ADL has been around for certainly well over a century, and we're in communities across the country, 25 regional offices, and we have a presence abroad too, in Europe and in Israel and beyond. And when it comes to fighting hate, ADL has always said, where people go, hate follows. And in light of that, knowing that the internet was becoming a place of community, even in 1996, that was on ADL's mind way back then. So I've said this before in different settings, but ADL has been fighting hate online since the days of dial-up. And the role then is different than now. But in fact, I was actually presenting at a community event, and a board member said, yes, that's true. And then followed up with me and sent me a program that she had, a physical program. She scanned it and sent it from 1997, talking about ADL fighting hate on the internet and the internet's new terrain and hate online. So even back then, truly, we've been in this fight, but we've seen the evolution pretty intensely. And starting in 2016, starting when our CEO Jonathan Greenblatt came on to ADL in 2015, and then shortly thereafter in 2016 and 17, that's when we really doubled down on this work and launched our Center for Technology and Society. And when we launched that center, that was when ADL really resourced researchers, engineers, policy experts, and other staff dedicated to fighting online hate, to fighting online extremism, and to looking into platform accountability. So that was in 2017 was when we launched. And from there, ADL's policy team, and specifically our tech policy team, has really dug down and leaned into how can we engage in legislative advocacy and community engagement to fight online hate. And we've done a lot of that over the last several years. So I'm getting a note from Lizzie about the internet. Her internet is dying. So in light of that, I'm going to keep talking a little bit about the state of hate online, and we'll wait until Lizzie comes back. I see a hand up. But essentially, so we took that fight from 2017, like I mentioned, and beyond, and really started thinking about, well, who's being impacted online, and how can we as ADL ensure that individuals are not being impacted for their identity characteristics. So in 2018, ADL decided to launch the first of its kind online hate and harassment survey. And we put that research out into the world and have consistently reported on the state of online hate and harassment for the last 3 years or 4. We're coming out with the newest data soon. So unfortunately, our hypothesis that individuals are harassed online because of their identity was and has been validated every year since we put out that survey, and found that individuals are being targeted because of what they look like, how they pray, who they love, even though our physical spaces and our digital spaces, would seemingly be separate. They're actually quite intertwined. So 1 in 3 individuals who are harassed online, this is from this last year's survey, 2021, or 2022 data just came in, but 1 in 3 individuals who are harassed online attribute that harassment to their identity. That means, whether you are based on race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and a couple of interesting statistics regarding that. This past year, we saw African-American respondents reporting the sharpest rise in race-based harassment. So in 2020, there was a 42% rate, and that jumped to 59% in 2021. So I'm talking 2021 numbers again, because 2022 data is coming out pretty soon. So incredibly problematic. And we also saw significant rises in severe harassment. So the AAPI community experienced the largest single year-over-year rise in severe harassment from 2020 to 2021. And it's these pieces of data that tell us that individuals need to be further protected online because they're being targeted because of who they are. But B, looking at the correlation between online and on the ground harassment. You think about 2020 and the coronavirus and a lot of AAPI hate and blame, all because of the spread of mis and disinformation. And for those who are asking, AAPI is the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And so anti-Asian hate, anti-AAPI hate, it's a great question. We know that Asian Americans, especially according to the organization Stop Asian Hate, experienced a huge rise in physical assaults against the community and individuals. And we similarly saw a huge rise in severe harassment online. So while we can't necessarily talk about causation, we can certainly talk about correlation when we think about physical and digital abuse. I see your back, Lizzie, so I'll stop with my lecture.
No, thank you. If this could happen to anyone, I'm happy that it happened to me when I was with you, because I knew you could fill in. That was a very strange thing, but I hope I'm back now. So I've been listening to a lot of what you're saying, but all of these categories really, really blend. I think you were definitely talking about who is it impacted, who is this internet hate impacted, and where is it happening. So I think that we're going to turn now to, so how much can we blame? I don't think we got there yet. Tell me if you dug deep into this. Okay. So how much can we blame, hold responsible? What impact does the social media platforms really play in this? I understood the correlation, that you were just talking about, but maybe let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was talking about the state of harassment online, I was really talking about the way that individuals are targeted by perpetrators of harassment, right? But where is this taking place and why is it so prevalent? I think we can look no further than social media to think about not only harassment online, which was what I was really focusing on, but also hate and extremism and disinformation. And it's happening on mainstream social media, in addition to the corners of the dark web. But really, it's happening on our Facebooks and our Twitters and our Instagrams. And this proliferation is because the way that social media works and the business model favors content that is corrosive, that is hateful, that is extremist. And ultimately, the reason is because platforms need to keep us on their sites for as long as possible to sell as many advertisements to us as possible. And the way they do that is by collecting a ton of our information and then serving up content that we might find interesting. Not that we might agree with, but that we might find, we can't look away from. So for some people, that's cat videos. But for other people, it's conspiracy theories. And dog videos. For other people, it's conspiracy theories. And it's that influence, this idea that platforms, regardless of motive or incentive, their algorithms, the mechanisms with which they recommend content to us, serve us this type of content. And then that has resulted in the normalization of hate and extremism. It's resulted in the normalization of harassment and the ability for someone to feel like empowered to target another individual. And it's all because there's just no incentive for platforms to change their business model. They're monetizing off of our human nature's worst features. And one example I like to give really quick about, why is it that we're so attracted to this type of content? It truly is human nature. And if you think about driving on the freeway, I know, sorry, last thing you want to think about in the evening, but no one stops to look at a beautiful sunset. If there's a beautiful sunset, traffic is still moving super smoothly. But when are we stuck in traffic? It's when there is a major accident. And it's because people slow down to look at the accident and then, move on their way. And that really just truly is our reaction to content. We don't agree or disagree necessarily. And the same thing happens online. And that's why we think it's so important to focus on social media accountability in addition to focusing on protecting targets of harassment.
Absolutely. We're going to go to the questions in a few minutes, but also, I just want to say that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the rhythms and stuff like that, there is a podcast that really got my attention called Rabbit Hole on anywhere where you find your podcasts, and it kind of talks about a guy who got what's the word? Not brainwashed, but he got
Down the rabbit, sent down the rabbit hole. He
went
was
down the rabbit hole, and he the exploration of how he started on YouTube and how YouTube used to have algorithms that if you liked cat videos, they'd show you more cat videos, right? It was more and more of the same, and how that's changed. And just, if you like cat videos and then all of a sudden, this is a weird example, but like cat videos and it's going to grow into tigers, and, like
right.
it brings you deeper into a subject in a way that you almost can't even comprehend.
Exactly. Like if you're curious about a news story, they might, give you a high level. If you search for something, let's say the election, right? They might give you high level statistics, but then the next piece of content, and this happens across social media, but YouTube, of course, as well. They might give you something that's questioning those results. And then after that, they might give you a theory about why it's questioning those results. And then after that, they might give you, full conspiracy theories about other parts to the government. And in fact, in the fall, there were tens of thousands of documents leaked from an internal Facebook whistleblower. Some folks were following the story, others might not have been. There was great coverage on 60 Minutes about this. And interestingly, one of the types of information that was leaked was an internal research project that Facebook underwent to just sort of, this happens frequently with staff to sort of see how their algorithms are performing and working. And so they created a fake account of an individual who just was, I think it was like a 40-year-old woman who liked Fox News. And within a week, she was served up QAnon content. And I believe within less than 3 weeks, and I could be wrong, even shorter, but I'm skewing on the longer side, she was served content about the Proud Boys. So the algorithm was working in and of itself to go from something simple and innocuous, news, Fox News in this case, to QAnon, major problematic conspiracy theory, to Proud Boys, white supremacist, anti-Semitic content. And that's the rabbit hole.
So that is absolutely the rabbit hole. And actually that really helps me lead into this next question, which is, how do we hold people? It's one thing to hold a person accountable for what they say. It's another thing to hold a platform accountable for what somebody else says on their platform. So where are we heading in terms of how we hold these platforms accountable?
Definitely. Well, I mentioned Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, and there are tons of proposals for how we can reform this law to better hold platforms accountable. And they are moving through Congress, and ADL is speaking, regularly and advising different offices in Congress about the best ways to move forward. We've supported bills that seek to amend Section 230. One example is a bill that we supported called the Protecting Americans from Dangerous Algorithms Act. That would hold platforms accountable if they played a specific role, if their algorithms did, in civil rights abuses and acts of terror. So pretty narrow categories. And again, somebody would have to prove that the algorithm played a causal role in, or that the platform itself and the content in furthering some sort of unlawful content. Now, a lot of those discussions are happening at the federal level, but one of the issues that I want to talk about is that it's really hard to get things passed through Congress right now. And in light of that, there's a lot that's going on across states, whether it's privacy law, which is really important, and there are different robust privacy protections being passed in California and Colorado and Massachusetts and other places. But additionally, there are measures like a bill that ADL is championing and working on with Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel on compelling platform transparency. Essentially, having the
Let's say that.
ability.
Um, sorry, I know I cut you off, but I just want to to state that again about platform transparency and just letting people take a moment to think, what does that mean to you? What
Hmm.
does it's one thing to say social media transparency, but in some ways that's so generic, right? It's like this umbrella term. But if you really think of what does it mean to hold Twitter accountable, Instagram accountable, Facebook accountable, whatever your chosen platform is, really take a step back and say, if my kid was served QAnon material, and I couldn't, and I wanted to hold someone accountable, who would I hold? I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to make it give. I want to give everybody just a moment to personalize this topic, so that when you talk about, I think a little bit more about what we're doing in California, that you really understand. So let's, I'm sorry I interrupted that, but
No, I think it's important to
I
take a
think
moment.
sometimes people get overwhelmed by just the label, and I want everyone to really maybe think of a time where you saw something on a platform that you were really angry about. I do have to say, we've talked about this concept of echo chambers, which are like, meaning that like you're friends with people on these platforms who are similar to you, and so often you're like preaching to the choir. That would be the best way to describe it. And so I think someone like me, I don't always see a lot of the stuff that isn't aligned with how I think, because I don't have Facebook friends, for example, who aren't aligned. Because the minute that they're not aligned, I get rid of them. I'm not aligned, but the minute that they do something that I would consider hateful. So yeah. But Lauren, yeah, sorry. Go back to your the federal versus the state level, and we're getting some
Well,
great questions.
sure. And I have to say, at the federal level too, there is a focus on transparency. And it is kind of a loaded word. And so I can talk about federal versus state, but I really want to just take a moment on talking about why people are so focused on transparency and what transparency is. It is
Mhm.
essentially looking under the hood and seeing how these platforms are operating, getting
Right.
some truth and getting some, teeth to understanding this major influencer in our lives. There's a lot of different kinds of transparency that people want, and they think of it as a foundational step, right? If we're going to regulate the internet, if we're going to make sure that we're protected and our kids are protected, and that we're doing it in a way that's responsible, that upholds free speech, that keeps all the good and takes out as much, keeps as much good as possible, and takes away as much bad as possible. We need to fully know the picture. And right now, we only know a small sliver of the control, of the deliberate nature, of the research, of the algorithms that we need to. And so transparency is this idea that whether it's increasing access to data for researchers so that our academic researchers can help us understand these social spaces, or it might be looking into algorithms, right? And so how can we learn about ranking and design algorithms? Now, we don't want to get into proprietary information, but just like with Coca-Cola, we might not know the ingredients, the secret recipe, but we certainly know how much sugar, how much fat, how many calories. Can we know those same things about algorithms, for platforms? And then another area that ADL finds particularly important is all of these platforms have really robust policies. Sometimes they need work, and we've called platforms out when we think that their policies need to be stronger, but they do. A lot of them have anti-hate policies. They have policies on disinformation, policies on harassment, and foreign policy foreign political interference. But a policy is only as good as it's actually being enforced. So a rule that's not being enforced, or a rule that has exceptions that are so great that essentially the rule doesn't exist anymore, is unhelpful. And so what ADL is seeking in California, and we could do this at the federal level, and we're working on similar bills at the federal level, but there was a unique opportunity here in California to move forward a bill that would essentially require only big and well-resourced platforms, because we want to make sure we're targeting the right groups, to give quarterly reports about what is the state of your policy and how is it being enforced. How many times was a
Right.
policy violated? Was it appealed? Some of these things that, can just really help us know, are you essentially saying that you have these policies, or are you actually holding up that standard and really protecting consumers by enforcing them?
And I was just, as you're saying this, I was thinking, but man, there's like over, what did now we said 6 billion
Yeah.
people, no, 4
Absolutely.
billion people,
Yep.
4 billion people that you have to regulate. We don't have enough people to regulate 4 billion people.
Well,
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
it's true. And that's something that, the platforms often talk about, and it is difficult, but let me tell you, this particular bill targets platforms that make over $100 million in revenue. So we only want to really make sure that well-resourced platforms are really being targeted. But if you think about the money that's being invested in product development versus the money that's being invested in content moderation and management, it's completely off. Facebook is a
that's a good point.
trillion-dollar company. We can certainly up resources. Is it ever going to be perfect? No. But is it so far from perfect right now? Is it so under resourced as far as we know, right? We really are only seeing this little sliver. There's
Yeah.
so much more that we can do right now to protect consumers. And so that's the argument. It will never be 100%. But again, from this Facebook whistleblower, we learned, and it's only Facebook because that's the whistleblower, right? So I know these stats exist across the board, but Facebook only takes down about 3 to 5% of all of the hate speech on its platform. It takes down less than 1% of incitement to violence. Now, that's not protected by the First Amendment. And less than 1% is taken down. So there is a lot more we can do to improve technology, to hire more individuals, human reviewers, to make sure that content moderation and management's happening in different languages. So I agree, it's super difficult. And at the same time, these are the most profitable companies in the world, and they're dedicating, a limited amount of resources to actually solving this problem and protecting people.
Um, wow. I mean, so there's so much to think about. I want to get to a couple questions because, believe it or not, we have about 15 minutes. So, although we don't want to specifically talk about Ukraine right now, it is early. ADL, I don't know if ADL has a fully fleshed even statement on Ukraine right now, but the concept of that Adam was asking, which is when you're scrolling through that social media feed and you are seeing social media news reports, false or true, online that you're reading, maybe this is more of a fact that social media does impact our behavior on the ground. So, where Adam was asking, how do the false social media reports impact what has happened on the ground in Ukraine? I don't know that we know that yet, right? Like, eventually, I'm sure there's going to be stories about, well, I heard this online or I heard this here. And so that made me do this, right? I heard that this was going to happen, right? But let's talk a little bit about how maybe the social media, I think what I'm getting at is false reports on social
Sure.
media affect people's everyday behavior.
Absolutely. And I want to let you know ADL has put out a statement on Ukraine. We condemn Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. You can absolutely go to adl.org to look at our positions. But I think you're right that this gets at, and this is yet another iteration and example of a global event that is being shaped, or our understanding of it is being shaped by social media. So I think, it's, to your point, there's some nuance here. And in fact, there's a lot of coverage regarding Spanish language disinformation about Ukraine online on social media. So there's, of course, specific issues here, but ultimately it does just color or illustrate another example of where a lot of information being spewed by a lot of different people is circulating with different, what is it inauthentic? Is it foreign in nature? Is it disinformative? So, the difference between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is when there is an intentional spread of false information. Misinformation is the unintentional spread. It can be the same piece of
Right.
content, but what
Oh,
does
I
the
thought
person
that.
spreading
Yeah.
think? Exactly.
Right.
Either
Oh,
way, all of those facts are proliferating across the platform, and platforms have policies against mis and disinformation, and they do enforce them to some degree. But most often, it's that a comment might be labeled or a comment might be downranked just a little bit. But if we think about COVID, and how often did we look at a piece of information, saw that a label said this might not be true, and completely ignored it and then read the information? The same thing
exactly.
happens with current events across the board. It's happening right now. So yes, and that gets back to the incentives. Platforms don't really have an incentive to really invest and ensure that false information is not being spread. And in fact, right now, what is this information doing? It's keeping people on the platform. They're scrolling and they're looking for more and more facts and articles. And what's the platform doing while we're doing that? They're delivering us advertisements. So they are monetizing this
Exactly.
event, all of the events that happen. Yeah. So it's a great
Um,
question.
Absolutely. So thank you, Adam. I want to go back. We're going to go back to Sue and then Adrian, but I just want to, Tony's question just came in because I was totally aligned, which is like, but I've also gotten so much positive information from social media. And Tony was saying, can we discuss how social media has been a source of positive information that have helped people in suppressed countries spread the
100%.
word about things? So before we go into the dark web, maybe
No,
we
yeah.
talk a little bit about that, about the positivities of social media.
That's exactly why we need to be so careful and thoughtful with reform and like liability, right? And that's why it's important to focus on things like transparency so we can see the state of play,
Right.
before we get into other pieces, because that's exactly right. In some countries, Facebook is the internet. In so many different countries, and even in the US, people organize. There's a lot of very democratic and necessary, protest information, spreading information about authoritarian regimes, all of that that happens on Facebook and on other social media platforms as well. So it's been a source globally for individuals to be able to connect and organize and protest and spread information when there's very limited avenues to do so. It's also been that source here in the US. And it's exactly why we can't just, take a sledgehammer to the internet. We need to really take a scalpel when we think about reform.
Um, Absolutely. And because we like, many of us like, I mean, I know people take breaks, but many of us like social media. And
Yeah,
one thing
I do
that
too,
struck me,
Yeah.
yeah, one thing that struck me that you said, which is like, you just said the platforms have no reason, they have no incentives to be the first one to take down that misinformation, to be the first one. And the only thing that's going to be an incentive are these laws that are being put into place that says, you will be penalized if you continue to increase hate on the internet. I mean, that's how the world works, right?
Right. And if we instead, if only we had platforms that competed based not on how long we stayed on the platforms, but on how well they treated their users, that
Right.
would be amazing, right? And that's another reason for transparency.
There
When
we
someone's
go.
looking over your shoulder, then you get to create spaces, you're on your best behavior. And then you get to create
Absolutely.
spaces for all the great reasons. And the really important reasons why social media and social spaces exist online.
So, Sue, I'm putting up the question because it's very important. Can you talk about dark internet sites and how and why shutting down these sites really founded on hate is so difficult to shut down? And is there anything that can be done about it? And I
Absolutely.
just want to highlight one thing, which is that often social media are fueling these other dark internet sites. They're not just living out there, they're being shared on the social media platforms.
Liz, you took the words out of my mouth. So,
Uh-oh.
for just a little bit of background, taking a step back, the web is a very dynamic place. We've been talking a lot about mainstream social media. There are also, what people call the dark web, which are encrypted or more private discussion forums or platforms that require, levels of different levels of security to get in and to be able to engage. Problematically, some of these sites are dedicated to, content that is anti-Semitic, racist, extremist. ADL Center on Extremism has done a ton of work and research into extremist communities on the ground, but also primarily online. And so there's a lot of information out there. The issue with how hard is it to regulate or monitor dark web? I mean, one of the reasons it's encrypted, right? It's hard to get into those spaces. Another reason they are, which is exactly what you said. They don't just, the content doesn't just live on those sites. It
Right.
boomerangs between mainstream social media and back. So an individual there, we've also, ADL's also done research on discussions happening on, dark web forums, planning how to socialize certain issues. In one most recent case that I worked on, it was how to talk about anti-trans legislative reform. So all of the terrible bills running through state legislatures that are targeting the trans community. These dark web communities were talking, how can we normalize this? Talk about it on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter to get people interested in believing, our beliefs essentially. And so there's a lot of coordination that happens. And then additionally, there's just also the use of these platforms. Put a link up, put an article up, and then you target somebody who's more mainstream, and then all of a sudden they have a way into darker spaces.
I think it's this is like an interesting thought I think that I just had, which is, um, you know, so how many times have we seen somebody puts up a tweet, and before they have a chance to realize, oh man, or I shouldn't have put that up, somebody has screenshotted the tweet,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like again, it doesn't just live on Twitter. It then all of a sudden is on every piece of social media. It's emailed, it's texted. Like, can you
Yeah.
believe what he just said, right? And I was thinking about the fact that the other day I was on Hulu watching a funny show, and I wanted to take a screenshot on my iPad of like I had the subtitles on because I like to read, right? And I wanted to, and it wouldn't let me. And I was like, oh my gosh, Hulu has figured out a way to not let you screenshot or video grab their content.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. If Hulu can figure this out for the sake of protecting this
Their
intellectual
IP. Yeah.
property,
Mm-hmm.
then perhaps we need to figure this out in terms of internet hate and spread of misinformation.
Well, Lizzie, you bring up a really good point, and that is that like a lot of product features, so not just policies, we talk about policies and enforcement, but literal product features can be innovated to decrease the spread of hate. So, for example, like platforms can put up interstitials or, friction is what we like to call it. If somebody is about to send a link to 1,000 people, a pop-up message can come up and say, are you sure you want to send this? Is this accurate? Additionally, in the case of harassment, if one user is targeting or sending messages to another user in such an egregious amount, like 100 messages a minute or something, platforms can build in product features to stop them, or to pause and say, well, you sent too many messages to this individual at this amount of time. So those are
Interesting.
just two small examples, but we can really also look to product and to engineering innovations to also help decrease the spread of hate online.
Yeah, and I don't want to be easy on a Mark Zuckerberg, but I do have to say that maybe he did, but I don't know that he could have imagined at 11 years old when the internet was really introduced, that the internet could have as far of a reach. And it's one thing to imagine that it can have as far as far of a reach. It's another thing, as you said, to say that where there's more communication, there's more hate, etc. It's another step to say, and I'm defending a little bit to say, like, they can't keep up with the technology. And that's where our resources have to go, because the internet has grown bigger than one mind can even think. And we need to be 10 steps ahead and think, for example, this new, Oculus kind of stuff, all the metaverse and stuff like that, that's going to be way more accessible to, my, how old is she? 4-year-old niece.
Yeah.
right? In 3 years, she doesn't have to walk out of her house to even feel like she's meeting somebody. And what are they doing to protect a 4-year-old right now?
Right. And, I hate to be a pessimist here, but they can keep up with the technology because they're creating the technology. So, to your
That
point,
yeah,
in thinking ahead, it's thinking, there was a big movement called privacy by design. So, building products with the ideas of privacy. ADL has pushed for anti hate by design. So, when you're first building a
right.
product, you need to think through or anti-bias by design, who could be negatively impacted and targeted. How can I mitigate for that early on? You're never going to get it perfect.
Absolutely.
There is so much we can do. And at the same time, it's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be hard. We'll always have to be looking around corners. But to me, that's not enough to not continuously move the needle forward and create an environment where hate and extremism are back to the fringes of the digital world and not on the mainstream.
Yeah, I think that part of that pessimism is, you know, we're taught to assume somebody is innocent until proven guilty. And there's a little bit of the opposite that has to happen with the creation of new social media, and which is that you have to assume that there is going to be hate that is going to come along with the amount of people that social media can reach. Because if we don't assume it, we cannot protect against it. We cannot be naive. I want to get to this. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, please.
Last question from Adrian, which I think is interesting. And I have mixed, I want to hear what you have to think about it. Here we go, Adrian, because you were so patient. I'm going to put up your question there. Do you think anti-hate on platforms is more prevalent because of a sense of anonymity? I probably said that wrong. Online, the fact that people can be anonymous.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And in some ways, yes. And in some ways, anonymity is so important. So I'm going to talk about the two sides of the coin really quickly because I know we're coming up on our time. But yes, I think that individuals, certainly, bad actors, feel more empowered to engage in nefarious actions and to spew hate and disinformation when they're hiding behind their screen. And whether it's completely anonymous, whether there's just that guardrail. And I do think that there's some level of human nature to that, right? Like if somebody is looking over our shoulder, are we, if our boss or our teacher or our parent is looking over our shoulder, are we acting in a different way than we might when we're alone? There's been interesting social science research about kids who trick or treat on Halloween, and the ones who wear masks take more candy than the ones who don't. And
Oh,
and
interesting.
similarly, with anonymity online, people feel empowered to engage in behavior that they might not, especially like bad behavior. Having said that, anonymity is also so important for individuals who need community and who aren't getting it at home. If you think about a kid who might be coming out and wanting to find their LGBTQIA community, and they live in a household that might not be accepting of that, or a victim of domestic violence who needs to find a safe haven and needs to first be anonymous to be able to seek resources and help online to be able to get those are just two examples. There are so many where having the ability to explore online and get information and find community in a way that's just more protective of your individual self really has had major benefits. So yes, I think there's more to do with
Good point.
anonymity and something to
Yeah.
explore, but it's tricky.
Amazing. Lauren, thank you. There's so much further that we can go with this. I think it'll be interesting to maybe touch base as we see how this legislation is really taking shape, and to see how it comes through. I want to remind everybody that the work that Lauren does is very important. You can find out more about it here at adl.org/stop hiding hate. Do you want to say anything else about what they can find at that website?
Absolutely. We're doing a lot with fighting online hate and holding platforms accountable. But here specifically, this link is devoted to our efforts in California. So for all of us Californians here, go on, check it out. There's a lot of ways to get involved in the work that we're doing in the California legislature that can really have nationwide impacts, because once we have transparency, we're really able to see and better understand how platforms operate.
Absolutely. It, I'm so proud of the work that you've chosen to do with your experience and how you're getting a master's to even further your education is amazing. If you know any amazing lawyers who are interested in learning more about ADL, send them Lauren's way. Not only to be a part of the ADL Glass class, which is what brought Lauren and I really into the Anti-Defamation League. I serve on the regional board here in Los Angeles. Obviously, Lauren now works for them, so it worked, the glass class. But any kids, I should say kids, any young lawyers who are interested in learning more about ADL, often it is a place where sometimes when lawyers feel like they're not always fighting the good fight, they want to do some good, and it's a good place to come and learn, right? So,
Exactly. For lots
thank
of
you, everyone.
people, but lawyers specifically in some capacity.
Right, right, absolutely. There was, I would say, about 60% of our class was of our glass class were lawyers, and the rest were in entertainment or a Cantor. But I would like to tell everybody that we will be back next month. It's either going to be Rabbi Aaron or Rabbi Aaron with me, with this amazing pastor from St. Bridget's Church, Father KK, and with Liav Sofer of Urban Voices. Save the date, April 10th, for a giant interfaith concert called Songs of Freedom. I'm just bringing it up here so you can write it down. But my goal is that our next Think About It Thursdays, if it all comes together, it might have to be a Think About It Tuesday, will be a real frank discussion about our interfaith, the need for interfaith relations today in Los Angeles, and which is something that we at Temple Emanuel really want to focus on. So send me an email if you have any questions. Lauren, do you have, if you want to reach out to Lauren, I think maybe they can find your information on the ADL website, or I think that's probably the best way. Type in Lauren Krapf, ADL, and you will find her. And I want to thank you again, Lauren. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you. Always great to talk, and I appreciate, the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.